Howdy. Um, Humanities 2, Shasta College. We are in our last full week of the semester, the summer short and summer school semester. Um, Hope everything's going well out there. It's still hot, smoky, but not as hot, but fires are everywhere. So be careful out. Um, Hope you're doing well. Hope you're having time to watch all these things I'm throwing at you. Um, Hope it's not too much information coming at you too fast, too furious, and hope you're getting something out of it and enjoying it. Um, I'll be posting everything is due. You could get it, have everything due between now and the day, except for, of course, the quiz, which I won't give until Monday. But you could get your final paper in, final essay, if you want to watch the final Citizen Kane essay. You've got until next week to finish it, but you can finish it early. Um, I'm just now getting done with your essay 4, so I'm almost finished with the classical composers before I move on to the writers. Um, what else is there? Your journals. Make sure you're keeping up on those. I'm going to post those today. You'll be able to turn it in between now and the end of class. I don't care. It's okay if you end on cinema. That's fine. You don't have to take it all away because it's going to take me a while to grade all this stuff. So the sooner you hand it in, the better. And remember to be very detailed on that journal reflection. I look at what you got out of the class by looking at your words, what you're writing. Also, I look at your discussions, and that's how you get the points on that. And it's worth quite a few points, so don't slack off on that. So anyway, other than that, today we're talking about post World War II cinema, mostly Hollywood, but I'm going to veer off right now and go to Italy. Now, when we were at war, in the big war, it was, you think it's just with Germany or Japan. Well, for a while, Italy was, until they gave up, didn't want to fight it anymore, and Germany started bombing Italy. They're, anyway, so the Italians didn't want to fight the war anymore, and Germany's during the latter part of the war, say 1945 or so, Germany was losing the war, say 1945 or so. Germany was losing the war badly, and filmmaking is such a strong, important voice to express history that Italian filmmakers were Germany. In was a way of him to have the job. He needed, without the bicycle, he wouldn't have the job. And in the midst of his job, his bicycle gets stolen. And that's the entire story, folks. The rest of the movie, he's looking for the stolen bike. Everywhere he goes, he needs the bike to feed his child, who travels around with him. Young boy travels around with him. De Sica used amateur actors. He liked to do that. So it's got a documentary feel to it. It's scripted, meaning there's a script and they're not making up their own dialogue. If you look at the film, I hope you do one day. It's called Bicycle Thieves for a reason. Well, because in the midst of his desperation, he steals a bike, but he is caught. And instead of being arrested, which a lot of people wanted him to be arrested. He was let go by people who saw what he was trying to do, meaning he was trying to feed his family, and so they let him go. But the son witnesses this entire transaction of him stealing the bike and being caught. It's an ethical dilemma. Do you feed your family, or do you become a bicycle thief? There's no happy ending to it, folks. That's the brilliance of it. Both of these films started a new era of cinema called Italian neo-realism, which means the new realism. The reason why is because it's called that because they didn't have much money, and they had to film usually on the streets, out in real locations, not on Hollywood movie sets. They had to film out where life really takes place with real people. Open City has professional actors in it, and you could tell the acting is excellent, heartbreaking, and terrifying. We here in America have never been occupied. If you can imagine being occupied by people who, if they see you on the street, may decide on that day to interrupt your life somehow. And that's what Nazis did. And in this movie, they end up killing the heroine over nothing because they could. So American filmmakers saw this new cinema was coming over to America, and then they're still expected to do comedies and lightweight musicals, and everything's entertainment. Well, these directors had gone through the war. Maybe you saw that preview for the 5 directors who came back from the war. They couldn't make the same films anymore. They had seen too much carnage. They'd seen what warfare looks like, and that is going to change you. So they couldn't make these films anymore. Neo-realism changed the way Hollywood filmmakers wanted to make movies. They saw another avenue besides the slick Hollywood studio system. There was a moment in time, there was a genre of film called film noir. It's a French word for black film, meaning the stories are dark. Yes, and they're actually filmed darkly. They use very little light. They're very low budget to make, and they're usually around marginal people who exist at night: thieves, criminals, cops, detectives, women of the night. So it depicted America. There was dozens of film noir came out of the 50s, and it was a different kind of America. Once again, we'd gone through the war. This is why these films are coming out like this. We had been through something so horrific that we just couldn't go back to the way things were. And we couldn't put a smiley face on everything. And so these films, which is one of my favorite genres, dealt with the darker side of American life. The side of life that takes place usually at night. When people are safely in their beds, the people in these film noir movies are out doing what they do at night. So it was populated by actors and actresses who were edgy, living on the edge. Usually, typical film noir would involve somebody who maybe is a private detective. That was a big deal coming out of the war. And he is investigating a crime that the cops are not investigating properly. So he's going into places that police can't go to. A lot of times there is a woman involved, and she is known as a femme fatale, the fatal woman. And she is perhaps going to ensnare this person into doing something corrupt for her because she's that beautiful. She's trading on her sex appeal to get something done for her. And a lot of times it's murder. Nobody's going to end up good in this. Nobody ends up. Great movie with Robert Mitchum called Out of the Past is perfect. Film noir. She is a femme fatale that is willing to do whatever it takes to get what she wants. And men, she could bend uh, men around her little finger, and that's why she's called the fatal woman, fatal female. These are French terms, film noir, fatal woman, fatal female, because French invented a lot of the terms we use in cinema, auteur theory, which is something I'll talk about. It's in that documentary I want you to watch for the quiz. Auteur means the author of your own work. It means you have a personal stamp, a visual stamp. Not just that, but we can tell as a director who wrote the script, who filmed it, just by looking at the style. Hollywood had a lot of directors, hundreds. A lot of them didn't have visual styles. They put the camera up, they filmed the shot. Other people started standing out, like Howard Hitchcock, Billy Wilder, John Ford, and they had a definable style in their camera work, the character development in the scripts. Howard Hawks, Orson Welles, John Huston. And in the 50s, Elia Kazan, once again, Billy Wilder, and who was not an American citizen. He was an American citizen, but he wasn't born here. He escaped Nazi Germany before Hitler shut all the borders. We got a lot of German directors here. Fritz Lang, Otto Preminger, William Wyler, who came from out of the Nazi era countries that were turned into Nazism in the 30s, and they were filmmakers there, but they escaped because they were Jews, and they knew the writing was on the wall. They had to get out of the country. Fritz Lang was such a famous director and successful director in Germany. He had done Metropolis, that they wanted him to stay. And Goebbels, who was the head of the propaganda and who loved movies, by the way, told Fritz Lang that he didn't have anything to worry, even though Fritz Lang was Jewish, because he said, if we say you're not Jewish, you're not Jewish. We want you to stay and make movies for us. He left. Don't ever believe a Nazi. They can't be trusted. So a lot of them came to America and had very fruitful careers. And they had a way of telling a story that was a little bit darker because they'd lived through some dark stuff. So film noir reflected that. It reflected our human spirit of the times. It's the times the soldiers were coming home from World War II, and they came back to lives that they didn't understand anymore. It wasn't the same America, and these films reflected that. And that's the cultural significance of these films. What was going on in the culture reflects what's going on in the films, and the films reflect what's going on in the culture. There was a distrust for a so-called normalcy, the white picket fence, the nice job, the 2 kids, the happy family. People didn't trust it because it probably didn't exist. During this time, television came into being. The 50s was the boom of television, and it killed Hollywood movies. It really did. People were staying home. They stopped going to the movies because television was free in those days, folks. You had to sit through commercials. There were only 2 or 3 channels, but that was enough. And so people were staying home and watching The Honeymooners and I Love Lucy and Playhouse 90, and they were not for free, and they weren't going to the movie theater. So Hollywood was struggling how to get those people back in the theaters. And so during this time, it was a time of a major paradigm shift in the fortunes of Hollywood. They could no longer depend on everybody going to the movies. So they were struggling. And so films, sci-fi films became huge, but it wasn't space operas, folks, like Star Wars. It was mostly um, movies that were based on the results of the atom bomb and the nuclear testing that was going all on. We're now out of a hot war, but we're into a cold war with communist Russia, Soviet Union. And it was the great who had more bombs, more nuclear bombs. And so our films reflected that. There was a fear that we were going to get into nuclear with the Soviet Union. My entire childhood, it was a reality. It was a reality. It wasn't a matter if, but and so the movies were reflecting that also. So that's what's going on. And we had a very coming out of the war. We had survived the war. Essentially, Europe was devastated. Japan was devastated. But we did okay here because nobody bombed us here because we had the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean preventing that. So we were never invaded. So when we came out of the war, the GI Bill, inexpensive home loans so they could buy a home, and college. More people start college than ever before in our history. More people not can afford to buy a home because they bought it on the GI Bill. My dad bought our first home on the GI Bill. He bought our house for $12,000, if you can imagine that. 5 of us lived there for many years. So they were offered college educations, homes, and so they were offered college educations, homes, and so this also started flight for cities. And the building of suburbs, because more people can afford to have a car. With all the crime and the big buildings and danger on the streets, but 10 miles away, they were building what they called suburbs, the suburban sprawl, tract housing, commute into work. That changed everything. There's a whole way of life out there in the suburbs, and TV reflected that with family suburbs